2 more whistles. That's all that stands between the WNBA's biggest star and a suspension that could blow up a playoff race in real time. And nobody in that league office seems to know how to stop the countdown they started. Stick around, because by the end of this you'll understand exactly why one Friday night turned into one of the messiest weeks in women's basketball history. It started in Indianapolis on a Friday night that nobody who watched it will forget anytime soon. Caitlin Clark walked onto that court and did something that statisticians had to go digging through decades of box scores to even find a comparison for. 45 points, 10 assists, 4 steals, 2 blocks. A stat line so rare that you could count on one hand the number of players, men or women, professional or otherwise, who had ever put up anything close to it. And she did all of it in under 30 minutes of playing time, still operating under a minute's restriction her own coaching staff hadn't even lifted yet. By the time the final buzzer sounded, comparisons to Michael Jordan were flying across social media. Luka Doncic's name got dropped more than once. Analysts who cover this league for a living were sitting there trying to find the right words, and mostly failing, because what Clark had just done didn't fit neatly into any of the usual boxes people use to describe a great performance. For one single night, the entire conversation around Caitlin Clark was exactly what it should be. Basketball. Just basketball. What she did on the floor, what it meant for the record books, and where a career like this could possibly be headed next. Then Saturday happened, and it took 90 seconds to undo the entire mood of the weekend. 90 seconds into Indiana's next game, this time against the New York Liberty, Clark got caught in a hard screen set by Liberty center Jonquel Jones. She hit the floor. She looked up, waiting for the whistle that would call the foul. It never came. She got up, said something to the nearest referee, and within seconds, she had a technical foul standing next to her name. Her 6th of the season. $1,000 gone before the game had even found its rhythm. And just like that, the same player who had made history less than 24 hours earlier was now sitting 2 technical fouls away from an automatic 1-game suspension. Let that sink in for a second. Friday night, history. Saturday night, discipline. Same player. Same weekend. How does a league go from celebrating its biggest star to finding her before she's even settled into her 2nd game? Indiana still won that game, by the way. Kelsey Mitchell dropped 33 points, and the Fever cruised to a comfortable 108-88 win over a Liberty team that had actually beaten them earlier in the season. On paper, that's a massive road win for a team fighting for playoff positioning at 15 wins and 10 losses in a conference that's only gotten tighter as the year has gone on. But nobody was talking about the win. What everyone was talking about was the technical, the fine, the math. 6 down, 2 to go before a mandatory night on the bench. Fans who had spent Friday night replaying one of the greatest individual performances in the history of women's basketball spent Saturday night doing something completely different. They were counting fouls like a suspension clock ticking down in real time. And that whiplash wasn't some random coincidence. It wasn't bad timing. If you've been paying attention to this season closely, you already know this has been building for months, one disputed whistle at a time. To actually understand why Saturday hit as hard as it did, you have to rewind all the way back to June, because that's really where this whole story starts. Back in June, Clark picked up a technical foul in a game against the Phoenix Mercury. It was the kind of call that a lot of fans and analysts immediately flagged as borderline, at best. The kind of technical that usually just disappears. Referees swallow calls like that all the time in the heat of a physical possession, and everyone moves on without a second thought. But this one didn't disappear. The league reviewed it, and instead of rescinding it the way it had done for other players in similar situations earlier that same season, the WNBA let it stand. That one decision lit the fuse. Not because a single technical foul is some massive scandal on its own, but because of what it revealed about how Clark's situation was apparently being handled compared to everybody else on the floor. Fans noticed almost immediately. Screenshots of that decision were circulating within hours. Timelines filled up with side-by-side comparisons of other players with similar or even rougher on-court behavior who never faced anything close to the same level of scrutiny or discipline. Why does a call get overturned for one player but stand for another in the exact same season? That question became the lens every single technical foul afterward would get filtered through, and it never really went away. By the time the 6th technical showed up in July, fans weren't reacting to one isolated bad call anymore. They were reacting to a file they'd been quietly building since spring. Screenshot by screenshot, box score by box score. Every disputed whistle cataloged, and compared against a pattern they were increasingly convinced the league either couldn't see or simply wasn't willing to address. That June call didn't just cost Clark a fine. It cost the league the benefit of the doubt from a fan base that was already watching closely and was now watching with a magnifying glass. Here's what makes this situation genuinely hard to write off as fans just being dramatic online. Look at who else has been willing to talk about it publicly. Stephanie White is Indiana's head coach. She isn't running a fan account. She isn't some commentator with nothing on the line. She's a professional whose entire job depends on being careful with what she says about officiating, because saying the wrong thing can create real problems with the league office. And even she has addressed this pattern directly, telling reporters after an earlier technical that there needed to be real conversations about being more strategic with how those calls get used against her own player. Sit with that for a second. A head coach, on the record, essentially confirming that managing Clark's relationship with WNBA officiating has become something her organization has to actively plan around. Not something they're hoping quietly goes away. Not something they're brushing off as internet noise. Something they're strategizing about internally. When a coaching staff is choosing its words that carefully in public, that tells you everything about how serious this has become behind closed doors. National media picked up on it too. Outlets that cover sports well beyond just the WNBA started using phrases like political tug-of-war to describe the whole dynamic. Praised as the league's biggest draw one week. Disciplined more visibly than her peers the next. And once that kind of framing escapes WNBA-specific coverage and lands in the broader sports conversation, the league stops controlling the narrative. The story starts telling itself. Casual fans who never thought twice about technical foul procedures are now asking questions about fairness and consistency, simply because the story has grown big enough to reach them. That's a completely different kind of pressure than an angry tweet thread. That's a league's public image being shaped in real time by a conversation it never chose to start and absolutely cannot just wait out. Now look at where Clark actually sits in the league's technical foul standings, because this is where the picture gets even harder to explain away cleanly. She's currently tied for second in the entire league, sitting behind only Angel Reese and tied with Kelsey Plum. Three players whose games look almost nothing alike. Reese is a physical interior force who plays with an edge and constantly draws contact. Plum is an aggressive two-way guard who attacks the rim relentlessly. Clark is a perimeter playmaker whose entire game is built around spacing, passing, and shooting range, not the kind of high-contact, emotionally combustible style you'd typically expect to produce technical fouls at this rate. So what exactly explains three completely different playing styles landing in the exact same disciplinary bracket by the midpoint of the season? That shared number is a lot harder to write off as coincidence than it sounds. It invites questions. And when those questions don't get clear answers, fans fill the silence themselves, and the conclusions they're reaching aren't exactly favorable toward the league office. The fan base has responded to that silence with something remarkably organized, considering there's no formal structure behind any of it. Every single technical now generates its own instant wave of real-time commentary and documentation. People refreshing box scores mid-game specifically to track whether Clark just picked up another one. Screenshot threads cataloging every disputed call with timestamps and video evidence attached. Comparison posts stacking Clark's technical foul history right next to players whose conduct was objectively similar or worse. This isn't random venting. This is a fan base that has basically turned itself into an unofficial fact-checking department. Organized, persistent, completely unwilling to let a single questionable call slide by unnoticed. What does it mean for a league office when the people watching this closely are essentially building a public record of every decision it makes? That kind of sustained, documented attention is its own form of pressure, even without a formal campaign or a petition or a spokesperson attached to it. It just keeps existing, and it keeps growing every time a new chapter gets added to the pile. There's also a financial angle here that honestly doesn't get enough scrutiny. The WNBA quietly restructured its entire fine system heading into this season. Under the new setup, technical fouls 4 through 7 each carry a $1,000 penalty, a massive jump from the $200 starting point of previous seasons. That change applied league-wide, sure, but in practice it lands very differently, depending on who's actually racking up the technicals. For a player like Clark, who's approaching the threshold faster than almost anyone else in the league, the financial cost of frustration has been climbing steep and fast. $1,000 per technical sounds like something a professional athlete can easily absorb. But the real issue isn't the dollar amount itself. It's what that structure reveals about priorities. Raising the cost of a player's frustration while the consistency of the calls causing that frustration stays exactly where it was shifts the entire burden onto the player. It essentially says the answer to inconsistent officiating is to make reacting to it more expensive. That framing hasn't gone unnoticed among people who believe the officiating problem is the actual root cause here, not some side effect of Clark's behavior. To her credit, Clark herself hasn't tried to frame this as a personal grievance. She's been noticeably careful about that, consistently steering the conversation away from individual calls and toward a bigger structural argument instead. Her actual ask, the one she's repeated publicly all season, is for the league to move to full-time referees instead of the part-time officiating system it currently relies on. That's a meaningful distinction. She's not asking for preferential treatment. She's not asking the league to go back and overturn calls in her favor. She's arguing that inconsistent officiating is fundamentally a staffing and infrastructure problem, and fixing it would benefit every single player on the floor, not just her. That argument gives her position a credibility that pure frustration never would. It reframes the whole conversation from Clark thinks she's getting too many technicals into Clark thinks the league's officiating structure needs real improvement. Those are two completely different arguments. And the second one is a lot harder for a league office to dismiss without looking like it's actively choosing not to fix something fixable. So what actually happens if that eighth technical shows up? Strip away all the drama and the mechanics are pretty simple. The moment Clark picks up her eighth technical of the regular season, the WNBA automatically suspends her for one game. No hearing, no appeal that changes the outcome, a $1,500 fine stacked on top of it, and a mandatory night on the bench. For most players on most teams in most seasons, that's just an inconvenience. For the Fever right now, in the middle of a genuine playoff push, it would be something considerably more serious. Indiana is sitting at 15 wins and 10 losses, locked in a race in a conference that has only tightened as the season has gone on. Clark is averaging close to 21 points, nearly 8 assists, and 4 rebounds a night. She's not just Indiana's best player. She's the gravitational center of everything the Fever run offensively. The player whose passing forces defenses to completely rearrange themselves. The player whose shooting range alone demands adjustments no other player on that roster can command in the same way. Take her out for one game, and the Fever aren't just missing a scorer. They're running a fundamentally different offense on 48 hours' notice, in the middle of a stretch where every single game carries playoff weight. But the damage from a suspension wouldn't stop at Indiana's record. Every game Clark plays in this season brings something the league has spent years trying to build. Elevated attendance, elevated television ratings. A level of mainstream national attention women's basketball has historically struggled to sustain consistently. Every arena she visits sells out. Broadcasters point to her appearances as reliable ratings drivers. The league itself has openly credited her presence with accelerating growth in ways no single marketing campaign could have pulled off on its own. A suspension doesn't just cost the Fever a player for one night. It costs the entire league one of its most reliable draws at exactly the moment casual fans are paying more attention to this sport than they ever have before. And in the meantime, fans have started treating every single technical foul as its own contained drama. Refreshing box scores in real time during Fever games specifically to see if Clark's picked up something that pushes the counter forward. Watching every interaction she has with an official with a level of forensic attention that would honestly be unusual even in a playoff series. Every time she says something to a referee after a call, there's this collective held breath across social media before people find out whether anything actually came of it. That kind of sustained, granular scrutiny is exhausting for everyone involved, including, maybe especially, Clark herself. She's a competitor. She plays with intensity and emotion because that's exactly what competitive basketball at this level demands. Being asked to manage that intensity, not just with the game on the line, but with the suspension countdown quietly ticking in the background, creates a kind of pressure very few athletes in any sport have had to navigate this publicly. None of this is an argument that she should get a free pass on legitimate technical fouls. Nobody serious is making that case. The actual argument is simpler and honestly a lot less comfortable for the league to sit with. The margin for error has gotten dangerously thin at exactly the moment her performance has never been better, and the stakes for everyone around her, teammates, coaches, broadcasters, the league itself, have never been higher. Look at everything Clark has already had to manage just to get to this point in the season, and the picture gets even heavier. She came into the year dealing with injury concerns that forced her coaching staff to implement a minutes restriction that's technically still in place right now. The physical contact she absorbs on a nightly basis has been documented and debated since her rookie season. Contact that's already sparked its own separate conversation about whether officials are applying the rules consistently when it comes to how she gets defended. Now stack a suspension threshold sitting 2 technicals away on top of all of that. A fine structure that penalizes her more steeply with every additional call. And a league office that hasn't publicly responded to the structural concerns she keeps raising week after week. That is a genuinely significant amount of pressure concentrated on a single player at a single moment. And it's landing during what should be one of the most celebratory stretches of her entire career. A week that opened with a 45-point, 10-assist historic performance and then pivoted almost immediately into a fine and a suspension countdown. That contrast isn't subtle. It's exactly the kind of contradiction that makes a story feel bigger than any single moment inside it. For Fever fans, this entire stretch has created a kind of divided attention nobody should have to deal with in the middle of a playoff push. Part of every game is just watching basketball. Part of every game is watching a counter, waiting to see if this is the whistle that changes everything. That tension wasn't there a season ago, and it only exists now because this situation has been allowed to escalate without any clear resolution from the people who actually have the authority to provide one. Everything about this traces back to one central question. Does the WNBA actually plan to answer Caitlin Clark? Not with a vague statement. Not with a fine structure update buried somewhere in league memo language. Actually engage with the argument she's been making publicly and repeatedly, that officiating inconsistency is a structural problem with a structural solution, and respond to it in a way that makes clear the league has actually heard what she's saying and is doing something meaningful about it. Because right now, the response has been silence and fines. And silence plus fines, applied consistently enough, starts to look a lot less like a coincidence and a lot more like a policy. Fans have been counting every whistle since spring, and they're not stopping. The media attention that started inside WNBA-specific coverage has spread into mainstream sports conversation, and it isn't retreating. And Clark herself has shown zero signs of softening her position or backing off the public argument she's been making all season. That's 3 separate directions of pressure, from the supporters, from the commentators, and from the player herself, all landing simultaneously on a league office that hasn't yet found a way to respond without making the situation worse or the problem more visible. The countdown still sits at 2. 2 more technical fouls, and this conversation stops being about what might happen and starts being about what is happening. 2 more whistles, and the league's most watched player ends up on the bench for a game that won't get covered as a routine disciplinary outcome. It'll get covered as the culmination of a story that's been building since June. Every remaining game on Indiana's schedule carries playoff weight. Every possession matters. And every one of those games was built around the assumption that Clark would be on the floor, running an offense that only works the way it's designed to work when she's in the middle of it. Whether that 8th technical arrives in the next 2 weeks or never comes at all, the pressure is already real, and the question it raises is already sitting in the room. A league that spent 2 seasons openly crediting one player with reshaping the commercial and cultural trajectory of the entire sport is now 2 bad whistles away from sitting that same player down in the middle of a playoff race. And the people watching this closely aren't confused about what that would actually mean. They're simply waiting to see if the league is. The fan base has built its record. The media has built its narrative. Clark has made her argument clearly and repeatedly. Now the only question left is whether the WNBA is actually listening or whether it's just going to keep cashing the fines and hoping the noise eventually dies down on its own. Based on everything that's happened since June, it doesn't look like it will.